Some truths don't need a podium, they need posture, a straight spine, a calm face, a man who knows what he stands for and doesn't flinch when questioned. But here's the trap. Most men bleed energy trying to explain themselves to people who were never truly listening. Not to understand, not to support, but to judge, to measure, to undermine. Let's get this straight. Your values aren't up for debate. Your boundaries aren't committee decisions. And your choices, they don't need permission slips. You weren't built to be universally accepted. You were built to walk in your own alignment, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Seneca said it best. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. The more you crave being understood, the further you drift from inner peace. And that craving, that's weakness disguised as social grace. This isn't about arrogance, it's about sovereignty. Real men don't explain, they embody. So today we burn the need to justify. These are the 5 things you must stop explaining starting now. Like this video, subscribe for more Stoic clarity, and drop your declaration below. I walk with clarity without explanation. Let's begin. 1. Stop explaining your standards. There's something quietly tragic about a man who keeps explaining himself, especially when it comes to his standards. It always starts off small. Maybe it's with a partner who pushes a boundary, a friend who makes a joke that cuts too deep, or a colleague who crosses a line. And instead of holding firm, he justifies, he gives background, he pleads to be understood. But here's the truth. Every time you explain your standards, you're not gaining respect. You're giving someone permission to negotiate your principles. A man's standards are not up for debate. They are the architecture of his life. And the moment you start explaining them to people who've already proven they don't share them, you turn your code into a suggestion. That's not power, that's compromise. And compromise, when it comes to core values, is where erosion begins. I once watched a friend go through this spiral. He was a man of structure, discipline, and routine. But in a new relationship, he found himself softening the very edges that made him strong. He stopped going to the gym as often. He skipped his morning solitude. He laughed off disrespect to keep the peace. And the more he tried to explain why he needed those things, the more he was treated like a man who could be molded. He wasn't seen, he was edited. Stoicism doesn't ask us to become rigid, but it does demand clarity. And that clarity means you stop apologizing for who you are. If you have standards, and you should, they exist to protect your peace, your progress, and your purpose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Standards are how you preserve that quality. They filter who gets access, who gets close, and who earns the right to remain. The moment someone asks you to explain your standards, ask yourself this: are they trying to understand you or trying to bend you? Because the man who walks with clarity won't waste time bending for those who benefit from his confusion. He doesn't shout, he doesn't beg, he doesn't even need to justify. His life speaks for him. So the next time someone asks, "Why are you like this?" don't offer them a story, offer them silence. Because the right people don't need an explanation, they need an example. And if someone can't meet your standard, let them fall away. Not with drama, not with anger, just with the quiet, final strength of a man who refuses to dilute his character to make others feel more comfortable. Now let's talk about the next thing that never needs explaining: your silence. 2. Stop explaining your priorities. Did you know that the average person spends over 6 years of their life scrolling on a screen? Not building, not bonding, just numbing. That's the cost of misplaced priorities, time handed over to distractions disguised as connection. And when a man decides to reclaim his focus, to rise above the noise, he'll find that the first thing people question is not his discipline, but his devotion. They won't ask how he's doing. They'll ask why he's different, why he stopped showing up to every gathering, why he turned off notifications, why he seems distant when they gossip. And then comes the pressure. Explain yourself. But a Stoic man knows that explaining your priorities is the first step to having them dismantled. You don't need to defend why you get up before dawn, why you skip the drama, why you protect your time like your sanity depends on it, because it does. The moment you start rationalizing your focus, you give others the power to poke holes in your path. And they will, because your clarity threatens their confusion. Your momentum exposes their stagnation. Epictetus warned, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That is not an invitation to arrogance. It is a reminder that you are not here to be validated. You are here to become. And becoming requires making choices that others won't understand. You will be called cold, distant, obsessive, but those are labels given by people who've never tasted discipline. A man's priorities reveal the architecture of his life. What you give your time to, you give your soul to. And if someone feels entitled to your hours, your energy, your bandwidth, they don't see you as a man, they see you as a resource. Stop explaining your schedule to people who spend theirs avoiding their own reflection. You don't need to account for why you're unavailable to chaos. You don't need to justify why you guard your mental space like a fortress. You're not arrogant, you're aligned. Stoicism doesn't demand you isolate yourself. It demands you master yourself. And mastery begins with ownership of time, of thought, of direction. You don't owe explanations for choosing peace over noise. You owe yourself the commitment to stay consistent when the world hands you every excuse not to. When a man starts living with intention, he threatens those who live on impulse. And that threat will show up in subtle ways. Questions that sound like concern, suggestions wrapped in jokes, guilt disguised as love. But you must stand firm. You must remember, not everyone deserves a front row seat to your transformation, and the more you explain, the more you dilute the very thing they can't understand, your purpose. So stop talking about it. Let your results speak. Let your boundaries speak. Let your eyes, steady and unmoved, say what 1,000 words never could. Now let's move into the next thing a Stoic man refuses to explain: his silence. Third stop, explaining your solitude. There is a silence that feels like absence, and then there is a silence that is presence, intensified. But most people can't tell the difference. When a man begins to pull inward, not out of depression, but out of discipline, it unsettles those who've grown addicted to his availability. They start asking questions, not out of care, but out of confusion. Why aren't you replying faster? Why didn't you come? Why are you so distant lately? What they don't understand is that solitude isn't avoidance. It's sharpening. It's the sacred ground where a man breaks his own illusions, studies his own mind, and reclaims his inner authority. A man who retreats into stillness is not cold. He is calculating, not to manipulate, but to fortify. Because clarity never comes through chaos. It emerges through intentional withdrawal, and only those brave enough to be alone with their thoughts will understand its value. But here's the trap. When you start explaining that solitude, you weaken it. You open a door that was never meant to be shared, and the moment you invite people into that space, people who do not honor it, you lose the edge you went there to find. They'll try to fill it with noise, suggestions, guilt, worry masked as warmth. But a Stoic man doesn't explain why he chooses silence. He simply walks deeper into it. Seneca wrote, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you can improve." You are not obligated to be reachable. You are not required to be understood. And you certainly do not owe apologies for choosing stillness over stimulation. Solitude exposes everything, especially in a man who dares to sit still. It shows him what hurts, what heals, and what no longer serves him. It builds a different kind of armor, one that isn't forged in noise but in reflection. But this kind of strength threatens those who can't face themselves, so they'll interpret your silence as rejection. They'll claim you've changed, that you're cold, that you've pulled away. Let them talk, let them interpret, but don't let them interrupt. You don't explain meditation to someone who fears stillness. You don't explain vision to someone who only lives for validation. And you don't explain solitude to someone who needs a crowd to feel whole. A man committed to inner work doesn't shout about it. He shows it in how little he responds to foolishness, in how rarely he reacts, in how powerfully he returns, stronger, clearer, quieter. So let your solitude offend them, let your distance provoke questions, and answer none of them, because the man who learns to walk alone eventually becomes the man no one can shake. And now, let's move to what's perhaps the most misunderstood and most resented of all: why you must stop explaining your transformation. 4. Stop explaining your pain. Pain doesn't always show on the outside. Sometimes it hides behind a nod, a routine, a steady voice. And when a man carries his pain like that, quietly, without dramatics, people assume he's fine. But here's the trap. When he finally decides to open up, to explain that pain, to make himself visible again, he often chooses the wrong person. A man doesn't hand over his sword in the middle of battle. Yet this is what explaining your pain can feel like, offering something sharp and sacred to someone who neither earned it nor understands what to do with it. And when that pain is misunderstood, or worse, minimized, that moment of vulnerability becomes another wound to carry. There was a man, call him Daniel, late 50s, blue-collar grit, a son who didn't call, a wife who left 5 winters ago, a business he built with his bare hands, now barely paying for the roof above him. He didn't complain. Stoic at heart, Daniel showed up every day, held his tongue, and kept the machine running. But there was a moment, one night after a long shift, over a beer with a supposed friend, he cracked. He shared what he hadn't shared with anyone in years: the loneliness, the fear, the weight of being a man who was always expected to hold it together. And you know what he got in return? A laugh. Not the cruel kind, just the dismissive one. The kind that says, "Come on, man, everyone's got problems." And right then, Daniel realized, he hadn't made a connection. He'd handed his sword to someone who didn't even believe in battle. And that night, he learned a Stoic lesson most men learn too late. Not everyone deserves access to your wounds. The world tells men to open up, to talk more, to share, but it rarely warns them of the cost of exposing unguarded pain to ears that haven't earned it. The wrong person won't comfort you. They'll categorize you. They'll take your story, add it to their assumptions, and weaponize it if the moment ever suits them. Stoicism does not mean suppressing pain. It means holding it until you've turned it into wisdom. It means sharing it only with those rare few who will hear it without judgment, without fixing, without using it against you later. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength includes knowing when to speak and when to be silent. A Stoic man feels deeply, but shares selectively. He does not wear his wounds like badges. He does not make confession a performance. He knows that healing is often a private rebellion, done in silence, done in solitude, done in moments no one sees. When you explain your pain to someone who doubts you, you give them ammunition. You invite critique when you needed compassion. You ask for understanding from someone who never wanted to understand you in the first place. And when that happens enough times, you don't just close off. You calcify. You stop trusting even those who might have earned it. That's why the wise man learns not to explain his pain to everyone. He writes, he trains, he walks. He processes in the quiet places where ego can't distort truth. And when he emerges, it's not with a scar he needs to show. It's with a strength you can feel the moment he walks into a room. So here's the truth most won't tell you. Some people ask how you're doing just to hear weakness, to feed their superiority, to reassure themselves that even strong men break. Don't give them that pleasure. Let them wonder. Let your discipline speak louder than your despair. Because the man who holds his pain with dignity is not avoiding connection. He's protecting clarity. And now we move to the final form of power most people won't understand until it's too late. Why you must stop explaining your transformation. The moment you grow beyond the version of yourself others were comfortable with, they'll beg for an explanation. But what they really want is for you to shrink again. Let's talk about that next. 5. Stop explaining your growth. There's something deeply threatening to people about a man who grows in silence, especially when he does it without seeking applause, permission, or praise. And that's exactly why you must stop explaining your evolution to those who haven't earned access to your process. Here's a fact most people ignore. The average adult only reads one full book a year, but watches over 1,000 hours of television. Think about what that says. Most people aren't committed to personal growth. They're committed to distraction. So when you start speaking with more clarity, withdrawing from shallow talk, or cutting off old habits, don't expect cheers. Expect confusion, or worse, resentment. You'll hear it masked in subtle jabs. You've changed. You think you're better now. Or, why are you so distant? They're not curious. They're uncomfortable, because your elevation is exposing their stagnation. And instead of rising with you, they'll try to pull you back down to the version of yourself that made them feel safe. But the Stoics were clear. You don't owe anyone your past just because they're afraid of your future. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." If their confusion or criticism stands in your way, it is not your job to pause and explain. It is your duty to proceed. Let their misunderstanding become your clarity. Seneca put it even sharper. As long as you live, keep learning how to live. That is not a group activity. Your growth is not a group vote. It's personal, private, earned in discomfort and secured through detachment. When a man truly begins to evolve, he threatens every lazy narrative people have attached to him. They liked you when you were predictable, when you laughed at the same jokes, when you stayed in the same place emotionally. But now, you speak less, you read more, you think deeply, you reject drama, and suddenly you're too serious. That's not a flaw, that's a feature. Stop explaining why you don't show up to the same places, why you decline the call, why your circle is quieter now. You don't owe updates to people who didn't invest in your becoming. Let your absence be your explanation. Growth is a quiet revolution. It doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It just removes you from what no longer serves your higher path. So remember this. When a man stops explaining his transformation, he steps fully into it. He's no longer negotiating, he's executing, and no one who truly values your soul will demand a transcript of your evolution. Next, we move to a final truth that most won't dare admit. The more you explain your strength, the less people respect it. So let's end this series by exposing the trap of trying to justify your inner power to people who secretly fear it. Stay tuned. Some truths don't need a voice, they need a spine. You weren't born to keep handing out disclaimers like coupons for your worth. You were born to move with clarity, not seek permission for it. Every time you explain yourself to someone who isn't listening, you shrink a little. And the world doesn't respect a man who shrinks. It forgets him. Let your silence speak. Let your presence carry the weight your words used to, because a man who knows where he's going never has to justify the road he's walking. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's your directive. You don't need to argue. You don't need to explain. You just need to live in alignment and let the noise fall behind you. If this video hit a nerve, good. That's clarity knocking on the parts of you that are still apologizing. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. I don't explain strength, I embody it. Because once you stop explaining yourself, something powerful happens. They stop expecting it and start respecting it.